Hello students, welcome to today's session. So in this session we are going to see about introduction on artificial neural networks. So according to the theory which was developed by DARPA, that is DARPA neural network study in the AFCEA International Press Conference. So a neural network is a system which is composed of simple processing elements, so that is operating in parallel. So neural networks having the function which operates the elements in parallel manner. So and it is determined by the network structure. So the neural networks is a combination of neural network structures with the connection strengths and processing elements. So the speed which depends upon the synapse, that is the connection strength. So and the processing which is performed at the computing elements or nodes. So according to Hyken, so neural network is a parallel distributed processor that has a natural propensity for storing the external or experiential knowledge with available for use. So it resembles like the brain in two aspects. So one thing is that a knowledge which is acquired by the network through a learning process and the interneuron connection strength. So a neural network which is depending upon the knowledge, the amount of data which has been learned through the process, and the interconnection strength which is derived by the synapses, that is the synaptic weights which is used to store the knowledge. So these two are most important in building an artificial neural network. So according to the human brain, that there are over 10 billion nerve cells or neurons. So neurons are the connecting part, and neurons decides how much the capacity of the human brain has to store the knowledge, right? So on average, each neuron is connected to other neurons through the approximately 10,000 synapses. So you can also compare the features of human brain with the computers. So processing elements in the human brain which having 10 power 14 synapses, but in case of transistors we are using 10 power 8, and the element size is 10 power minus 6, and which is equal to the artificial networks. And also the energy usage is more or less the same which is used by the central processing units. And the processing speed is 100 Hz in human brain, and it is over 10 power 9 in artificial neural networks, that is the computers. So here the style of computation. So this is the major part where the parallel and distributed processing takes place in human brain. So and the serial and centralized part, that is the data has been processed one by one. So the fault tolerance has been detected in human brain, but in case of artificial or computing system there is no fault tolerance. And also the learning capability is more advanced in human brain, but it is a little bit in artificial neural networks. So there is the intelligent conscious which is usually happened with the help of a human brain, but it is not like that of human brain in case of artificial network. So these are all the interconnections in the brain. So these determines the number of interconnection determines the data availability and data strength. So the biological neuron, that is the motor neuron, having a dendrites and the cell body. So this is the major part, and it is the input zone. So the input zone is having the number of elements. So these elements which is determined in the biological neuron, which in case of a cell body, and also the dendrites. So axons are the information transmission system. So where the input side, and based upon the weights, the output zone will be depending upon the axon endings. So this is in case of biological motor. And the artificial neural network is composed of an information processing system. So these information processing systems is composed of neurons. So the neurons having the signals which are transmitted by means of the connection links. So the connection links which determines the signal, how fast the signal has been transferred. So next is the links, that is almost important one, which is also having the associated weights. So that is the synapse. So the output signal depends on both the inputs and the number of connection links. So it is obtained by applying the activation function. So this activation function is mainly depending upon the number of inputs and the number of weights, associated weights. So what is the motivation for a neural network? Here the scientists which are challenging using the machines to more effectively for multiple number of tasks which is currently solved by the humans. So that's why the motivation for artificial neural networks has been challenged. So symbolic rules that does not reflect the process which is actually used by the humans. So humans can understand at any kind of situation, but we have to make the machine to understand like a human. So that is somewhat a tedious process, but it is a challenging one. So traditional computing, which is excels in many areas, applications, but not in others. So the main area application is day-to-day life is applying the every functions which is performed by the human brain in order to make the computer as a behave like a human brain. So this is what a challenge which is faced by this. So the major areas we are concentrating for artificial neural network is the parallel processing, that is massive parallelism. Here the distributed representation and the computation. So here the data has been distributed and it has to represent, and with the help of the more number of data we have to compute with a specific period of time. So and the learning ability, so ability to learn like a human brain or human thinking, okay, and generalization ability. So here the adaptivity and the inheritance, so that it plays a major role in generalization. So it has to adapt at any kind of situation and inherit the information, contextual information processing, and it has to fault tolerance. So it was somewhat missing in artificial networks compared to human brain. And also the energy consumption. So energy consumption has to very low in case of processing the information. So the artificial neural networks, these neural networks will having the block diagram. So the diagram represents x1. So the x1 and x2 are the inputs, and w1 and w2 are the weights, and y is the output. So the output will depend upon the x1 number of inputs. So it may be x1, x2 and up to xn, and w1, w2 based on the number of inputs and number of weights. So this is the basic structure of a artificial neural network. So the output y, which depends upon the number of inputs and the weight. So it is the x1 and x2 is the two input neurons. So this is calculated for two input neurons and one output neuron. So the output is 1, which is being y, and the interconnected weights which are given by w1 and w2. So this is the association of biological neural network. This is a comparison with the artificial neural network. So the artificial neural networks, which composed of number of inputs, so the based upon the dendrites and cell body, and the axon will be the output zone and index will be the output zone. So the threshold value is the minimum value, so where the function will be activated. So the functions which are summation or whatever it may be, the function which is used by their processing method. So this is what a comparison between a biological neural network and artificial neural network. So the processing of an artificial neural network, so the basic structure is the neuron. It is the basic information processing unit of a neural network. So it composed of number of weights and the number of inputs. So here the first one is having a set of links which describe the neuron inputs with number of weights w1 up to wm. So m being the value which is the maximum value, and adder function. So we are having the inputs. So what kind of action to be performed? So that will be the adder function. So it is a linear combination for calculating the number of inputs, that is weighted sum of the inputs with the real number. So it is given by the formula. So u is equal to summation of j is equal to 1 to m. So the maximum. So for example, if you are using 3 inputs, means m will be 3 and j is equal to 1 to 3. So into w j xj. So this is the 3 input neuron. So the m value, based upon the m value, the weights will be the inputs will be added, and the activation function. So what kind of function will be performed? So this is the limiting the amplitude of the neural output. So the output will be based upon the y and the activation function theta and u plus b. So this is the equation for calculating the artificial neural network. So and then the bias. So bias is added to the weighted sum. So it is a constant value and it will be added to the weighted sum. So and also the output will depend upon the weighted sum and the bias value. So here the summation of wi into xi. So I be the number of inputs, and we can transform it to from the origin. So here the y in. So that is the output will be based upon the summation of wi, that is weight into number of inputs plus bias. So bias b is the bias, which is the term which is used for mentioning the bias. So we can see the number of inputs. So here the x1 minus x2. So here the 1 minus 0 will be 0 minus 1 will be minus 1, and x1 in case of 1 and 1. So in case of origin, which is will be 0. If the x1 value is greater than x2, so the positive side. So here the x1 value is less than x2, so that it will be starting from the negative region. So in case of a multi-layer artificial neural network, so these are all the inputs. So the input and the input vector and input layer and hidden layer. So the input which records without the class attributes with normalized attribute values. So we are segregating the class attributes value and the normalized values. And the input vector will be equal to a number of input that is represented as x. So and xn will be the maximum value, that is n is the number of non-class attributes. And the input layer is many having nodes which are non-classic attributes. So it is depending upon the length of the input vector. And the hidden layer is the number of nodes which is in the hidden layer, and the number of hidden layer which is depending upon the implementation. So it depends upon the nodes and also the implementation. What kind of structure will be required for the neural network. So this operation. So the operation which involves the input vector and weight vector and weighted sum with the activation function. So here the bias which is represented as b, and it is added to the input. So and the function which is the activation function which is determines the output y. So this output will be depending upon the number of inputs and weight vectors and weighted sum. So these values are depending upon the number of inputs. So these inputs will be having the weightage over what kind of output will be delivering to the delivering by the neural networks, right? So this output will be connected to the another network. So that is what the operation decides. So with all these values we can determine the output for a artificial neural network. So in order to behave like a human brain, so these are all the values which is required by the artificial neural network. So on the weight and the bias updation. So weight, how we are updating the weight? We are having the weight which is based upon the number of samples, and the biases after the presentation of each sample. So here the training or approach, that is the iteration which is followed by the number of inputs. So here the weights and the bias increments will be accumulated with the variables, and the weights and the bias will be updated after all the samples of the training sets have been presented. So here the training sets will be having the each iteration. So each iteration will be calculated based upon the function. So this function will be written with the help of activation function, and also the output will depending upon the number of inputs and the weight vectors. So bias will be the added value. And the stopping condition is the change in weights. So this is the previous approach or some threshold value. So the condition will be having the threshold value. So for this period of a time, the operation has to be operation has to be hold, or operation has to be misfed, or operation has to be stopped, right? So and then the percentage of samples will be misclassified in the previous approach with the help of some threshold value. So here the pre-specified number of approaches has been expired with the threshold value. So in practice there are several of values, that is approaches which may be required for the operation before the weights will converge. So this is what the operation involves. So the artificial neural network having the condition activation function, and based upon the activation function the output will vary with the help of input vectors and also the number of weights. So these are all the overall idea of artificial neural network with its operation. So and then this kind of operation will make the system to behave like a human brain. So overall we have seen about the neural networks and the biological neuron and the operation of artificial neural network with its introduction and its conditions. So thank you. Have a nice day.